All right, this video is for Module 40, and so now we're putting all together all this stuff that we've learned about economic growth and what causes economic growth in the long run with some of those economic models that we've talked about. And the first one that we have to relate it back to is the production possibilities curve. Remember this one? Way back at the beginning. So if you remember, we did the activity in class where we were talking about jumping jacks and math facts. Remember that? And we had everybody do jumping jacks for 1 minute, and then everybody do math facts for a minute, and then we split you. And what we found is that we found the curve that looked something like this, and so it was bowed out. Remember, it's bowed out because we have increasing opportunity costs. And in the case of our jumping jacks and math facts, it's not a one-to-one thing. You couldn't produce the same amount of jumping jacks as you could as math facts in 1 minute. And the reason is that they use different resources. It's not an exact trade-off. So you can't just go and take one person and move them from jumping jacks to math facts and expect the same amount. So that was the reason why it's bowed out. But we're not going to talk about math facts and jumping jacks anymore. We're going to actually talk about capital goods and consumer goods. And if you remember when we did talk about the jumping jacks and math facts, I did mention that a lot of times when you will see the PPC in economics books, you will find that oftentimes they either talk about capital goods and consumer goods, or guns and butter, or basically any resources that use, any products that use two different resources. So here we're going to talk about consumer goods and capital goods. So bear with me, we're going to do a very quick review of the PPC. So if you remember, we had all these points on our curve, so I have A through D here. And if you remember, what does this tell us about these points? So because they're on the curve, all of these points are telling us these are the most efficient, right? So these are the most efficient possibilities of these two products, okay? We know they're most efficient because we are making the assumption that everybody was working as hard as they possibly could, right? And that's the max you can produce with the amount of resources you currently have. So if that's true, what do we know about point X? So point X, remember, is telling us that here we have resources that are there, but they're not working to their fullest potential. So we have slackers, right? So we have people sitting around not doing anything. Okay, so we have resources that are not happening. And so then we also know about point Q that we can't currently get there because it's outside of our fullest potential. However, if you remember from when we talked about the PPC, what could potentially get us to point Q? If you answered economic growth, you would be correct. That would shift us on our curve all the way out to this awkwardly shaped purple line, right? And so this brings us to kind of what we've been talking about with this unit. So economic growth is shown by shifting this curve outward. And remember all of those things that we've been carrying throughout this unit of what causes economic growth. Increases in physical capital, increases in human capital, and increases in technology. So now here's the thing is that what will cause that? Well, here's the thing is that if we're picking any point along this curve, some of these points will lead to more growth than others. So if you pick, for example, all consumer goods, this point D here, okay, it will lead to eventually depreciation in the long run, and it will actually lead the curve to shift inward. Here's why. Think about it. If we're producing all consumer goods, so we're just producing stuff that consumers actually use. We're not producing any capital goods. However, remember, capital goods are being used in the production of consumer goods. So let's say, for example, every business uses paper. Even in this quote-unquote paperless world we have, we all need paper. So we need some sort of copier or printer to print our paper. So that's a capital good. All right, so let's say that we're only going to produce consumer goods. We're only going to make consumer goods in this economy, and we're going to need paper. So we have this one copier that we're just constantly using. We're just using this copier and copier, but we didn't make any new copiers because we're not making any capital goods. But over time, what will happen as we're using this copier? It'll break down, right? It'll break down, and eventually it'll quit on us, and no amount of repair will be able to fix it. Well, then, okay, it's going to slow down productivity. And because we didn't produce any more new copiers, we can't replace it. So as a result, what happens is our productivity declines, and eventually we're going to actually move our production possibilities curve inward. That's not good. So we don't want to be at point D, because this is not good for long-run growth. All right, so let's go the opposite route. So if we go A, okay, we go produce all capital goods. All we do is produce machinery and, for example, more copiers, okay? Well, that's good because it will lead to more growth in the long run. But the problem is, in the short run, we can't survive because we have people out there that need stuff. They need consumer goods. I don't have any clothes to wear because you didn't make any, okay? So that's not going to work either, okay? It would lead to, the most amount of growth, so maybe this yellow line would be crazy amounts of growth, but it wouldn't help us in the short run. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we need some sort of combination of both. So we need either B or C, okay? Because then we would be somewhere along this purple line. So it's not quite as much as if we were completely at A initially, okay? But at the same point in time, it's not going to cause our economy to shrink down to this kind of turquoise line. I have a little bit of a rainbow here. But the point is that A and D are not good. We want to have B or C. Where between A and D, it just depends upon personal preference. Okay, so that's one model. The other model that I wanted to talk about is the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. If you remember, we had this kind of a scenario. So we've always dealt with aggregate demand curve moving or the short run aggregate supply curve moving. Well, long-run aggregate supply could potentially move. We haven't moved this curve. Did you notice that? That could potentially move. So it could move due to economic growth, which includes increases in physical capital. And so things like, for example, remember our tractor? Or increases in human capital, so things like education. Or increases in technology, so like our little swiper up here, right? Either way, notice that what happens is that our long-run aggregate supply curve shifts, and now we have a new potential GDP. And so what happens then is that when this moves in the long run, if this is still our short-run equilibrium, now all of a sudden we're in a recessionary gap. So keep in mind that if you are given an example that talks about physical capital, human capital, or technology increases, that's actually going to move our long-run aggregate supply curve. All right, that's all I got. Let me know if you have any questions.